Okay, so LightReWrapper, what does it do? It does some cool stuff. So it's, I think, a sort of natural evolution from a regular light wrapper, where this lets you unwrap your image or your element or whatever, as well as then wrapping it as well. So first things first, what is a light wrap? Well, if you don't know, you're in for a treat. It's a good time. Grab a hot drink and buckle up. This is a spoiler for later on. So, first things first, light wrapping is where, generally I'd say it's where your sort of light in the scene blooms out on your, in your lens, and then will overlap your foreground element and will cause this kind of, I think here's probably the best example, where you just get this sort of overlap. And applying a light wrap to your CG, for example, is just a really great way to integrate into the scene. So the sort of standard way you'd go about this is, let me see, where's my roto? Let's just use this. Okay. There we go. So the standard way you'd go about this is, you've got your CG like this, and you would stencil that from your background, like so. I'm going blind. There we go. Very, very nice. And then you would do something like a true exponential blur. And that would just give you something to plus back over your CG, like so. And let's do a bit of cheeky pre-mult just to get rid of that stuff on the edge. And would you look at that, we are wrapping our image. And so when we blur this, when we merge this over the top, you can see we already had a light wrap, but you can kind of see how you get something fun like this. So where does LightReWrapper come in? Well, let's say, for example, we have a character in the scene, and this will come up in a bit, where maybe they walk in front of this light, or maybe they walk in front of this light, or this light even, and you've got your train. We've got the roto for it, but when Godzilla walks in the background, blocking these lights, we want that bloom to go away. We want that light wrap to be unwrapped, like a present. Well, for legal reasons, I don't have Godzilla, but I do have two Blobzillas, which are going to block out this light for us. So now, when we merge this over the top, like so, you'll see that our light is still just being bloomed over. It's being wrapped ever so slightly. And so that's where LightReWrapper comes in. So when you load up, you'll see it's got 4 inputs. It's got an image, a background, an alternate foreground, and a mask. And let's get right into it. So the way we would do this is we've got our background like this. I'm going to plug it into our image. And we don't need the alternate foreground input because the foreground element has already got its background. But if we wanted to make some changes to our background when we're unwrapping, like we wanted to make it more saturated, for example, so we could remove more color, that's where the alternate foreground comes in. And you can see as we disable this, it will automatically update, and you can just remove the expression if you need to. Okay, but we don't need that feature, we just need the background. And our background, in this case, is our little Blobzilla scene. So I'm also going to make Blobzilla just a bit darker, just so they're not so bright, but also because, the Blobzillas are a lizard. Cool. So now, you'll notice, first things first, we haven't actually got that much of a change, and that's because nothing's been turned on. So we've got our views here, and we can see our unwrapped data, our divide unwrapped data, our mult unwrapped data, and our additive unwrapped data. So first things first, let's look at our subtractive unwrapped data, and you can see right now it's not been bloomed out at all, and we can square it if we want to get these values super bright, which can be very useful. And you can also mult by the average. I might need to re-enable that if you want to not affect the saturation. But I will fix that button when this is out. Cool. So you can also see the divide unwrap data. Gosh, that's awfully bright, sorry, etc, etc. So the first thing we need to do is we need to pick our radius. So this can basically be any value because internally it's using a true exponential blur, but if you want to isolate it to just the edges, you could do something like that. So now when we go to look at our image, and sometimes this helps to look with a premult under it just so you can see yourself removing the light wrap. We could do this subtractively, and you can see that's kind of removing it a bit there, but I don't like to use the subtractive too much because you get negative values and you have to hack a few things. But you can also do the divide mode, and you'll see this is making the image a lot brighter. And the reason it's making the image brighter is because we're also dividing by the dark regions as well, and when you divide something by less than 1, it gets brighter. But if I square this, you can see we get something a little bit more reasonable. But then when we do the multiply wrap, you can see our multiply wrap data when we begin to turn this on. It's got our blobzillas in, so that original light, if we compare it to this divide data, is different. And so when we go to multiply this afterwards, you can see we get our scene, but without those red lights influencing it. And that's quite a lot, so you might want to do a mix. But let's see how this looks in the comp now. So immediately you can see we've got this change. Obviously we can tell this is way too much. We may only need something like this. But it's just enough that when our blobzillas are in and out of the scene, we can just feel that difference. And you should be able to see just a little bit in here. And you can see it's affecting our core just a little bit. So what you might want to do is you might want to take your alpha, invert it, and then you can do just a standard blur, or I actually like to do a true exponential blur here, not because I like plugging my own tools, but because I actually think it's more useful sometimes. And then we do something like this, and we use that as our mask input. You'll see we are just affecting our edges just a little bit, and so when we might be able to turn this up just a bit more. Yeah, you can see we're getting this fun effect. And then when we turn these up, no, let's not do that. I know why it did that. It was because we need to turn these negative values off. There we go. And you can see we're getting this very nice sort of rewrapped feel. And so this can be very useful when we've got lights being blocked, like for example, lights on set, lighting our actors, that then bloom out a little bit too much. But this can also be very useful if our blobzillas happen to be extremely bright. Like I'm going to very quickly, heavens, there we go. Okay, let's say our blobzillas are charging up to fire a non-copywritten blue beam. I can't imagine where I would get that inspiration from, but it certainly wouldn't be anything made by Warner Brothers. Cool, let's make this nice and let's make this really bright. There we go. So this could mess everything up. Yeah, look at that. Of course, this would also need a kind of bloom of its own. So let's really quickly just plonk this on, just so we've got something. Yeah, look at that. All right, radical. And yeah, you can see this is quite a lot. So I'm just going to turn this down by quite a huge amount. But yeah, you can see how that's starting to affect that. You can see it might be a little bit saturated. So we can change all these things. But yeah, you can start to see how this has a bit of value. Okay, now you can start to see where the mult by average is very useful. If I click mult by average here, what this is doing is it, rather than multiplying red by red and green by green and blue by blue to square your image, which makes it more saturated because it stretches the difference, what it will do is it will multiply red by red plus green plus blue divided by 3 to get the average, and this will then produce a less saturated image, which may be what you want. But now you can see how our image is going from being sort of red wrapped to subtly unred wrapping here and fairly heftily blue wrapping here, and you can just feel how it gives just a little bit more integration, a little bit more feeling. But this is not the only use for such a tool. It's also very good when you're taking characters from one environment and moving them to another. So let's say, for example, our client who our client decided that they didn't want to film in red lights. They actually wanted blue lights, and when the plates came in front of them, they were very confused, and they said, VFX artists, they're so great, they can do anything. Let's put them in the blue zone. So when we just plonk this over here without any changes, you can see it don't feel right, not at all. But when we begin to turn this on, you can see it just kind of sits in the environment a lot more, because it's unwrapping and rewrapping quite a lot. Like this is pretty heftily changing the plate. But you can see how, as you kind of play around with all the settings and pick something that that works for us, we get some pretty cool stuff. So this is how you can kind of use this on a plate. And it's the kind of thing where when you see it like that, it feels kind of right, and then you turn it off and you realize just how much it's doing. And it's the kind of thing where you can play with the radius and get various different effects. And obviously the core and the highlights are being affected a lot, so this would be something where we could create a custom mask for that. But what if we wanted to plonk this down over in this sort of paler section over here? Now this is where we may want to play with stuff a little bit more. So this is probably a good example where you can see we've still got a lot of red here, so we're not managing to unwrap quite by enough. So this is where the alternate foreground may come in, where we can plug it in like this, and you can see it looks like that. And so if I saturate this more, the more saturated red I make this, the more when we unwrap, the red will be removed. That is not a bus. There we go. Yeah, and you can see here, now we're using our alternate background. That's done a lot of the integration heavy lifting for us here. And we could play around with the saturation as far as that can take us, and then we could even go and manually. But now I'm just grading. If we're doing it like that, I might as well be doing stuff like this. But so that's pretty good. So let's move on to an even more intense example. So when I was trying to find a tennis example, I think I typed in LightReWrapper bloom night portrait into the internet, and I found this image, which was pretty much, I think, as bad as this could be before I resign and ask them to film it again. And so we've got the clamped highlights here, unfortunately, but when I can tell you this from experience, when this works with float data, those above one values really, really help. So I've just done a quick hack here just to get something. But when you see it in action, you'll kind of understand. So I thought, what if we got given this this kind of client note where they wanted all the highlights to be in all kinds of different places, and they wanted loads of things to be changed and all of that jazz. Well, you can see when we merge it straight over the top, it really, really doesn't have a good time. But when I start to slowly turn this up, you'll see we get something pretty good. It's not it's certainly not perfect, and there's some regions that I wouldn't even call good, but as a foundation, it's quite a difference. I think all of these sort of elements combining to integrate, it kind of helps a bit, and it is really really quite dynamic as well. You can sort of play around and mix and choose things as you need them. And I was quite happy with how this goes. This is the kind of thing where maybe this even is just a foundation for something that you then begin to paint from. could be pretty good. And you can see in the regions where we're trying to match the sort of bloom feeling here, put up here. It's working fairly well, and we can boost our highlights more or less, and it will remain fairly in line with what we'd expect. And finally, let's take a look at some CG stuff. So I've got the ever wonderful Bygone CG. I'm going to link to the film, and as always, check them out. They're always doing cool stuff, that team. So yep, scout them as always, because they rock. So what you can do when you've got the access to CG data like this is you can kind of grab your normals and use that to create sort of faux Fresnel or faux glancing angle information, and you can begin to do some pretty cool stuff. So what I've done is I've grabbed our lizards and put them in a city, and I hope Warner Brothers know that this is my own Blobzilla and nothing suable. Right, and then now when you turn this on, and I've just done some settings, you can see we're getting this really nice sort of wrapping Fresnel reflection feeling that again is it's really dynamic and very you know, you can make changes however you want and it will pick up quite nicely. And that's where the darken mix and brighten mix comes in, where you can pick whether, and I'll show this probably better on the tram example, where the brighten mix and darken mix, if you only want to make it brighter, you can control just the brighter highlights, and if you only want to make it darker, you can control whether it gets darker or not. So you can see how we keep the dark, the bright region, and that also I think proves fairly useful. But anyway, back to our dope lizards. Where am I going to plonk these guys? Let's put them... Oh, and it obviously goes without saying, the CG was designed for a forest environment, and I'm butchering it by putting it here. But you can see how, even with that, we've still got a bit of... well, we've got a lot of control to just play with our lizards and do some pretty cool stuff, you know. And if we turn the blur up a little bit more, yeah, you know, if we just compare it, I think the integration side of it is kind of night and day. So this can be very useful for when, you know, if there were like flames on set and things like that that are really tricky to get right in lighting, and just having that access to plate information in sort of relative real time can really do some favors. But there you go. That's light rewrapping. It's something that saved me a lot of times. As always, the tool will be downloadable from my site. And thank you so much for your time. Any questions, you're always welcome to drop me a message on LinkedIn. And happy comping.